In 1940, across occupied Europe, German guards believed the night belonged to them. Streets were quiet. Curfews were enforced. Patrols moved with confidence. Anyone caught outside after dark faced arrest, prison, or worse. Resistance networks were weak, scattered, and hunted. German sentries stood at checkpoints, factories, rail yards, and safe houses, certain that silence meant safety. But they were wrong, because somewhere in the shadows, an old idea was being prepared for modern war. And by the time German guards realized it, the night no longer felt safe. Watch this story till the end, because the weapon that terrified them did not look modern, powerful, or even logical for the 20th century. At first glance, it looked like something from a history book, something medieval, something that should not exist in a world of tanks, radios, and automatic guns. Yet this weapon spread fear in a way loud weapons never could. It did not explode. It did not roar. It did not leave smoke or fire. It arrived silently, struck suddenly, and left confusion behind. German guards began to fear not the sound of attack, but the absence of sound itself. The problem facing resistance groups in 1940 was simple to describe, but deadly to solve. How do you remove a guard without anyone hearing it? How do you silence a man without alerting the next patrol, the next street, the next building? Every option carried risk. Knives required close contact. Wires required surprise. Guns, even quiet ones, still made noise. And noise was death. German occupation relied on control through fear and visibility. Guards were placed everywhere. Factories, rail lines, bridges, power stations, offices. Their job was not just defense. It was presence. To be seen. To remind people who ruled the streets. Resistance groups could not move, sabotage, or communicate without dealing with these sentries. And killing a guard loudly was worse than not killing him at all. British planners understood this early. When Britain stood alone after 1940, sabotage and resistance became weapons of survival. If Germany controlled Europe, Britain would fight from the shadows. This meant supporting resistance networks with tools no regular army would ever need. Tools designed not for battles, but for moments. Quiet moments, dangerous moments, moments where one sound could change everything. British engineers began working on weapons that did not belong on battlefields. They were not trying to win, they were trying to erase obstacles. One guard, one door, one moment of silence, and this is where the strange idea returned. An idea older than gunpowder, older than rifles, older than modern war itself. The crossbow. For centuries, crossbows had been used for one reason. They killed without noise. Medieval soldiers feared them because they struck without warning. You could not hear them coming. You could not see the shooter. You only felt the result. In theory, this made them perfect for resistance work. Silent, simple, deadly. But medieval crossbows were large, heavy, slow to reload, and impossible to hide. No resistance fighter could carry one through a checkpoint. No agent could smuggle one into a city. If the crossbow was to return, it would need to be reborn. British and Allied engineers began experimenting with modern versions of this ancient idea. They stripped the crossbow down to its purpose. Store energy, release it silently, drive a bolt with enough force to kill a man instantly. All without sound, all without flash, all without leaving evidence behind. The result was not elegant. It did not look heroic. It looked strange. Compact frames, rubber power instead of wood or steel, short bolts designed to punch deep at close range. This was not a sports weapon. It was not designed for accuracy contests or long battles. It was built for one job only: kill silently. On paper, it worked. Tests showed that the weapon could fire bolts with lethal force. At close range, it could pass through a human body. The sound was barely louder than a closing door. In quiet streets, that mattered. German patrols would not hear it. Nearby guards would not react. The weapon seemed to solve the problem that guns could not. But war is not paper, and silence is not enough. When field testing began, reality returned. A bolt could kill, but it did not always stop. A wounded guard could scream, thrash, knock over equipment, fire his weapon. One man dying loudly was worse than one man alive and silent. In resistance work, instant collapse was everything. German guards were trained. They were alert. They stood in pairs. If one fell silently, the other might not notice. But if one made noise, the second would react instantly. A weapon that killed slowly was not silent at all. It was a liability. This realization changed everything. The medieval idea had failed the modern test. Silence without instant death was useless, and resistance fighters did not need clever weapons. They needed reliable ones. British engineers shifted direction. Instead of ancient ideas, they embraced ugly practicality. If sound could not be eliminated completely, it could be reduced enough. If the weapon could not be beautiful, it could be effective. What emerged from this thinking was one of the strangest weapons ever carried by resistance fighters. It did not look like a gun. When taken apart, it looked like a pump or a tool. Carried separately, it raised no suspicion. Assembled, it became something terrifying in close quarters. A simple tube, a bolt, a trigger, almost no sound. This weapon did not rely on medieval ideas. It relied on controlled gas, tight seals, and simple mechanics. It fired a small bullet, but trapped the noise inside. No flash, no crack, just a dull sound that vanished into the night. German guards never heard the shot, they only heard the body fall. This weapon solved the problem, the crossbow could not. It killed instantly. A bullet to the head or chest ended the fight immediately. No screaming, no movement, no alarm. The second guard often never knew what happened until it was too late. Across occupied Europe, resistance groups began receiving these tools. They were not issued widely, they were not common, but where they appeared, German confidence vanished. Guards began to fear shadows. They feared silence. They feared moments when nothing happened. This fear spread quietly. German intelligence recovered weapons from resistance caches. Reports circulated. Orders were issued. Guards were warned. But warnings did not help. You cannot guard against something you cannot hear. The weapon did not win the war. It did not change battles, but it changed behavior. German patrols became cautious. Movements slowed. Guards stayed closer together. Some refused isolated posts. Resistance fighters noticed the change. Control weakened. The true power of this weapon was psychological. It reminded occupiers that control was fragile. That power could be taken away quietly. That authority could disappear without warning. The medieval idea was abandoned. It returned to storage, to museums, to footnotes. But its failure taught an important lesson. War does not reward romance. It rewards function. A beautiful idea that fails in reality is worse than an ugly idea that works. British intelligence learned this lesson early. They tested, they failed, they adapted, and in doing so, they created one of the most feared tools of occupation warfare. Not because it was loud, but because it was quiet enough. German guards across Europe learned to fear nights without sound, streets that felt too empty, shadows that moved without warning, because somewhere nearby, someone might be holding a weapon that made no noise at all. If you stayed till the end, you now understand why this so-called medieval weapon mattered, and why it ultimately failed. It was not about history, it was about reality, and reality demanded silence and certainty. If you want more true stories like this, stories where strange ideas meet hard truth, support the video by liking it, sharing it with others who enjoy real history, and subscribing so you don't miss what comes next.